Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the show. When you think of pirates, what do you think of? Do you think of that movie? Do you think of the Caribbean? Do you think of modern-day pirates off the coast of Somalia or India? Or really anywhere? When you think of a nation protecting their sovereign borders, what do you think? They have the right to govern. They have the right to control it. And they have the right to make sure no one comes in and takes all their stuff. Well, that's our story today. We have a small nation. Really, just a county. That's controlling its waterways, controlling the land, and making sure its people are fed and taken care of. And then we have an outside force that comes in, says they're pirates, they're being rebellious, and forces them to pay tribute. It's imperialism. The first thing the powerful do is name you. Because if they can name you, they can frame you. And if they can frame you, they can do anything they want to you. Case in point, the murdering of 2 citizens and all the other immigrants that were murdered. When you label them dangerous criminals, people don't feel bad. Do you see what I'm getting at? They can justify anything. They don't call you a leader. They'll call you a criminal. They won't call you independent. They'll call you dangerous. They won't call you politically inconvenient. They'll call you notorious, rebellious, a problem woman, a bad influence, a threat. And that's the thing. The story of the Irish pirate queen, Grace O'Malley, is not just about ships and raids. It's about a woman who refused to sit down and shut up. And an empire that couldn't tolerate it.
They call me a pirate because that's easier than admitting I have authority. If I were a man, they'd call me a commander. If I served their crown, they'd call me useful. If I obeyed them, they'd call me loyal. But I don't. So they call me dangerous. Here's what they don't say. I know these waters better than any man they've sent to control them. I've commanded ships. I've negotiated power. I've defended my family and my land. That's not chaos. That's leadership. And if they want to pretend otherwise, they can do it while watching my fleet move through their trade routes. They think this ends with me bowing my head. It doesn't.
That voice is Granuaile, better known in English as Grace O'Malley. Grace O'Malley was born around 1530 on the west coast of Ireland in County Mayo, near Clew Bay. Understanding that location matters. This region wasn't governed the same way England was. Western Ireland was dominated by clan systems, operating under Brehon law. That meant authority was local, power was negotiated, leadership depended on capability, and maritime clans controlled coastlines. Grace belonged to the O'Malleys. They were a regional sea power that operated ships, castles, and trade routes. They weren't just some fucking fishermen. They were a force to be reckoned with. Their position included controlling access to waters, charging tolls, trading internationally, and defending territory. This is important context because English records label these activities piracy, but locally it was governance. 2 different systems interpreting the same behavior differently. Grace grew up in an environment shaped by ships and coastline logistics. So their loyalty is not to crown. Their loyalty is to a clan. And in this world, A clan isn't just a family. It's a military unit. It's an economic structure. It's a survival organism. And Grace is born into one of the coldest, smartest, most hardened clans on earth, the O'Malleys. Their motto is Terra Marique Patens, powerful by land and sea. And here's the key. The O'Malleys weren't pirates first. They were a maritime ruling class, meaning they had castles, alliances, property, armed forces, and trading routes. They were the West Coast equivalent of a navy. So when English sources whine later like Grace stole from ships, you have to understand the political truth underneath. If you control the water and foreign ships move through it, you have power. And power will demand payment. That's not crime. That's sovereignty. Grace is born around 1530. The exact date is fuzzy, but the era is clear. This is Tudor Ireland. England is moving toward empire. Ireland is being framed as a problem to solve. And the solution isn't coexistence, it's submission. But on the West Coast, Gaelic life still rules. Brehon law still shapes society. Old legal traditions that are nothing like the English system. And in that Gaelic order, women aren't powerless, but they have more space than in Tudor England. Grace grows up in that space, in castles, in boats, in hard weather. And the stories about her childhood are telling. The most famous legend is the haircut story. Grace wants to sail with her father. He says no. She cuts off her hair so it won't get caught in the ropes. Now, historians debate how true that moment is. But here's what's true. Grace's nickname, Gráinne Mhaol, means something like Grace the Bald, or Grace with cropped hair. And whether that came from the haircut itself, or a cultural naming thing doesn't even fucking matter. Because the myth exists for a reason. Because the people who remembered her remembered one defining trait. She refused the cage. And that right there, that is where modern comparisons begin. You know the cage. You know what it feels like for the world to tell you. Stay in your place. Don't be too loud. Don't make them uncomfortable. You should be grateful. Know your role. Grace heard the equivalent message in her own world. And she said, fuck no. And here's the thing about the sea. The sea doesn't care if you're male or female. The sea cares if you can lead. If the storm hits, everybody on that ship wants competence, not tradition. So if Grace proves that she can handle the boat, handle the crew, and handle fear, then she becomes legitimate in a way that a royal decree cannot fake. And this is why sea cultures produce different leadership sometimes. A land-based patriarch might say, a woman can't lead men. But a sailor will say, can she keep me alive? And that's how Grace's authority grows. Her knowledge becomes her crown. And that's why later, when English officials write about her, they don't describe her like a peasant. They describe her like a rival. That's England admitting out loud, this woman is powerful. Grace married young, like most nobility of the time. Her husband is Donal O'Flaherty, from another powerful maritime clan in Connemara. This wasn't a love story. This was alliance building. It's like merging companies. It's like joining gangs. It's like signing a treaty. Grace has kids. She learns war politics. And then Donal dies violently in a clan conflict. In most patriarchal storylines, that's where the woman becomes background. But not here. Grace becomes something else. A widow with teeth. And she doesn't just mourn. She retaliates, defends, consolidates. She's not waiting for fucking permission. And this matters. Because we're seeing a pattern. Grace doesn't treat tragedy like a full stop. She treats it like a pivot point. That's what oppressed people do in general. The system expects grief to break you, but grief often makes people dangerous because it burns away fear. Let's talk about the real piracy. Piracy in the 1500s is often an economic strategy in contested waters. Grace's crew hit vulnerable targets, collected tolls, enforced dominance, protected clan interests, sometimes cooperated with the crown if it was profitable, and sometimes burned everything down if it was necessary. And it's exactly what you see in any region where empires try to impose rule and local powers resist. The English later call her notorious, because of course they do. Because they can't say, we don't actually control the West, so they call her illegal. Empires always call resistance illegal. That's literally the whole trick. Now we bring in the system. Enter Sir Richard Bingham. You know the type. The law and order guy. The guy who thinks compassion is weakness. The guy who calls brutality discipline. The guy who can't imagine local people having legitimate power, only rebellion. Bingham looks at Connacht and he doesn't see a culture. He sees an infection, and he's there to cure it. Meaning, crush it. He targets Grace because she represents everything the empire hates: localized sovereignty, female authority, maritime independence, and the ability to inspire loyalty without crown approval. So he starts a campaign of confiscations, arrests, and humiliation. And the ugliest part? He targets her family. So the way Bingham treats Grace isn't unique. It's a prototype. Grace is in the crosshairs. Bingham is tightening the net. And Grace is realizing something terrifying. You can win raids, you can outsmart patrols, and you can command ships. But when the Empire decides to legally erase you, they don't just attack your body. They attack your name. They attack your children. They attack your ability to exist. And when they imprison her son, Grace makes her most dangerous move. She sails straight into the mouth of the lion. She goes to Queen Elizabeth, not as a beggar, as a rival ruler. The Empire never walks in and says, we're here to steal your land. They walk in and say, we're here to bring order. Order is a product they sell to weak people who are scared. And the moment you resist order, you become the disorder. That's how they justify anything. And in Grace O'Malley's story, the face of that order is one man, Sir Richard Bingham. A government employee who specialized in making whole populations feel helpless. And if you ever watch law enforcement, media, and politicians coordinate to destroy somebody's reputation before they destroy their life, yeah, that's not a modern invention. That's exactly what Bingham did. Richard Bingham was the English governor of Connacht. His job wasn't keep peace. His job was to end Gaelic power in the West. Because Gaelic Ireland wasn't organized like England. It wasn't built around one crown. It was clan power. That's a problem for an empire. Empires hate messy networks. Empires want a single chain of command. So Bingham arrives in Connacht and looks around and sees coastal clans controlling sea routes, local chiefs collecting tolls, private armies, local justice systems, and alliances that don't answer to London. He doesn't interpret that as culture. He interprets that as disobedience. And in empire language, disobedience is treated like a disease. So Bingham is not coming as a negotiator. He's coming as a crusher. And Grace O'Malley, being a sea power with influence in ships, becomes a target. And the most important concept in this story is Grace O'Malley wasn't dangerous because she stole cargo. She was dangerous because she proved the crown didn't have total control. And in colonization, control is the whole fucking point. Grace represented independence, local loyalty, sea mobility. And to make it worse for them, she was a woman. English officials couldn't handle the optics of a woman operating like a lord, so they framed her like a deviant. English records called her notorious, and Bingham later calls her the nurse to all rebellions. That's not an objective description. That's narrative warfare. That's the state saying everything bad that happens is her fault. They pick a face, they blame the face, then they destroy the face. Grace isn't just a pirate queen. She's a mother. She has children. She has blood ties with other clans. She has leverage. So what does Bingham do? He attacks her support structure. Because if you want to break a leader, you don't start with the leader. You start with their money, their food, their allies, and their children. It's collective punishment. Because this is how the system punishes problem communities. Not just one person. Everybody connected to them. Bingham went after Grace in stages. First, confiscation. He seized property, cattle, land rights, and ships. In a pre-modern society, confiscation is starvation. Cattle equaled wealth and food. If you take cattle, you're literally taking survival. Second was humiliation. He treated her like a criminal publicly. This matters because empires don't just want you poor. Empire wants you to be socially broken so nobody will follow you. Third, he made her a legal threat. Bingham pushed the idea that he could hang her. That's power. Not just, I can arrest you, but I can erase you. And number 4, family hostage pressure. This is the big one. He begins targeting her sons and relatives. Grace had multiple sons. Not all of them were loyal. And this story gets messy. Because Bingham didn't just fight Grace. He exploited the fact that clan families sometimes have internal rivalries. And this is a real colonial dynamic. The colonizer always finds somebody inside the community willing to play ball. Not always because they're evil, sometimes because they think it's the only way to survive. But it creates division. Then her younger son, Tibbet. I've also seen it pronounced Theobald or Tibbet Nalung, Tibbet of the ships. He's extremely important to Grace because he represents continuity, legacy, her bloodline, her future. Bingham arrests Tibbet, and at that point, the conflict stops being politics. It becomes a mother fighting the state. English colonial justice in Ireland was not neutral. It was an enforcement mechanism. Trials, warrants, executions. These weren't just law. They were tools to restructure society. So when Bingham calls Grace a criminal, you have to understand what he means. He means unacceptable, uncontrolled, not owned. The label isn't about the behavior. It's about the lack of submission. Grace O'Malley didn't respond like a victim. She responded like a strategist. Her responses include resuming raids. When your land gets stolen, raids become survival. She convened with the clans and built up her strength. And negotiation. This part is key. Grace repeatedly offered her services and ships. She wasn't just rebel versus empire. And here's the mistake every oppressive system makes. They think fear automatically equals obedience. But fear also creates rage. And rage creates resistance. Grace loses family members. She's threatened. She's stripped. So what happens? She gets even more fucking dangerous. And this is why these systems love to label people violent. Because they refuse to admit the violence was created by them from constant pressure. Bingham's governance wasn't just punishment. It was exploitation. This is a lesser known but important element. Colonial governors often enriched themselves through fines, confiscations, taxes, forced payments, and hostage ransom arrangements. It is a government that functions like organized robbery. So when Grace fights him, she's not fighting one man's ego. She's fighting an entire financial machine. And this is why Ireland under Tudor pressure becomes a poverty machine. When Theobald is imprisoned, Grace realizes she can't just raid her way out of this. Because Bingham can keep arresting her family. He can keep coming up with legal reasons. And he can keep escalating. So Grace does something that almost no one would dare. She goes over his head. She goes above the local colonial governor. She goes directly to the source of authority, Queen Elizabeth I. And this matters. Grace isn't going to London to beg like a peasant. She's going as a political actor to negotiate. That's a fucking boss move in any century. Because walking into the enemy's capital and demanding justice, that's fucking confidence. When Grace goes to Elizabeth, she's doing what oppressed communities have always had to do. She's forcing the empire to face her humanity, to face her legitimacy, to face her intelligence. Local systems refuse to treat you fairly, so you escalate pressure, you appeal higher, you shame them on a global stage, and you force attention. Grace was doing a 16th century version of that. Grace O'Malley is cornered. Her property is under threat. Her family is being imprisoned. Her enemies are writing the story about her. And she understands something deep. You can't win a propaganda war with swords. You win it by forcing the person at the top to see the truth. So she loads up. She sails across enemy-controlled waters. She walks into England. And she asks for the one thing colonizers hate more than rebellion: accountability. Imagine this. You're the government's favorite villain. They've called you a criminal, a pirate, a troublemaker, a traitor. They've seized your property. They've jailed your son. They've made it clear that they can hang you whenever it's convenient. Now imagine walking into the capital of the empire, into the palace. Not to apologize, and not to beg, but to negotiate. That's Grace O'Malley. And this is where her story stops being pirate legend and becomes what it really is. A masterclass in how oppressed people force the powerful to face them. Grace didn't beat England at sea. She beat England at politics. And I want to be clear. Grace going to Elizabeth was not normal. Irish leaders did not just casually stroll into royal courts. And Grace wasn't even an official lord. In English terms, she was a Gaelic sea power, a woman, a pirate, a person the system had already decided was illegal. So her plan was basically, I'm going to go above the governor, above the local system, and confront the monarch. That was some nuclear strategy type shit. And it only works if you understand something most people don't. Colonial systems are consistent. Local officials like Bingham may have brutal freedom on the ground, but they still answer upward. If you can reach higher authority, you can sometimes override local cruelty. And that's what Grace did. Grace didn't just roll up to London and start banging on the palace gate. She used a smart approach. She wrote petitions. She used intermediaries. She made herself useful. She framed her loyalty strategically. The documented record includes her petition and related state papers describing her complaints about Bingham and her request for help. This is important because it proves she wasn't just some folk, myth, pirate queen. She understood the administrative system well enough to fight it. Now picture the visuals. A woman from the west coast of Ireland, from Clew Bay no less, traveling across enemy territory. She's not wearing a crown. She's wearing lived experience. She arrives in England with Irish presence, Irish energy, and Irish defiance. And this matters. Grace wasn't trying to blend in. Grace was walking in as herself. And that alone is resistance. And Elizabeth, of all people, respected that. Because Elizabeth was a woman ruling men. And Grace was a woman ruling men. Different worlds, same pressure. Elizabeth didn't listen to Grace because she was kind-hearted. Elizabeth listened because Grace offered something real. Control and stability. The West Coast was difficult to control. Grace had influence. Ignoring her could fuel rebellion. Grace had ships. Elizabeth is running an empire. Ships matter. And Bingham was a tool, not a king. If he became too disruptive, he could be corrected. And that's what happened. Elizabeth basically told Bingham, "You may be governor, but you're not above my authority." And Grace didn't leave the palace with poetry. She left with results. Relief for her family and prisoners. Commands or orders that limited Bingham's attacks. Restoration of some confiscated property and rights. And recognition that Bingham's behavior was a problem. That was fucking huge. Because it shows something that people today still forget. Systems are not invincible. They're oppressive, yes. They're violent, oh hell yeah. But they are also bureaucratic, political, inconsistent, and sometimes vulnerable. And Grace exploited that vulnerability. Now, did Bingham just accept it? Of course not. Because people like Bingham don't just wake up and become moral one day. They get forced into compliance. Even after the meeting, Grace still had to fight to enforce the outcome. Because colonial officials operate like this. They delay, they obstruct, they sabotage, and they keep squeezing you quietly. Even if the top gives a direct order. So Grace, she had to push back. She had to threaten to return and complain again. And she had to survive under pressure. This is why the meeting with Elizabeth is not a fairy tale ending. It's a win inside of a war. Grace O'Malley's fight is about legitimacy. She was treated as an illegitimate power. And the state tried to criminalize her existence as a leader. Grace lived in the early stages of this Atlantic Empire world. The same Tudor England that was tightening control over Ireland was also building the mentality that would support later imperial expansion. Ireland was one of England's earliest training grounds for domination techniques. And those techniques didn't stay on one island. They spread. So here's what I want to end with. Grace O'Malley's story isn't just a pirate queen that did pirate stuff. It's a lesson. It's a blueprint. It's a warning. The Empire's first move is always the same. Label you. They call you the thing that justifies your destruction. And once the label sticks, your suffering becomes necessary. That's what Bingham tried to do to Grace. And it worked. Until it didn't. Because Grace did the one thing that breaks the machine. She refused to shrink. She refused to accept the narrative. She refused to let her enemies write her reality. She sailed into the Empire's capital and forced the crown itself to acknowledge her existence. That's power. Irish history teaches you what it feels like to be treated as inferior in your own land. And here's the punchline. Grace O'Malley stood on the edge of the Atlantic world and refused to be crushed by it. So you don't owe anybody a watered-down version of yourself either. It's the Time Machine Diaries. You know where to find me. I'm Cullen. I'm out. Fuck ice.